Hello class. This video is being recorded your third week, so going into chapters 7 through 10, and I'm going to try to record probably a few of these during the course of the term, just to give you a little sense of where you should be at and to give you some insight on what's coming up. So chapters 1 through 6, you've gone through intentional torts, which probably the most straightforward of the whole book. Battery, assault, things of that nature. Then you transition into negligence, which is the largest chunk of tort law out there, and it's a constantly evolving area, probably the most rapidly evolving area. And after this, you're going to move into strict liability. But let's talk a little bit about chapters 7 through 10. 7 through 10 are going to move you into the damages area. And a couple of things I just wanted to highlight for you. When you're looking in the damages section, make sure that you're strong on the definitions of and the differences between compensatory damages, punitive damages, nominal damages. Remember, the compensatory side of things, the idea of it is to put the person back in the position they were prior to the injury, to restore them, whereas punitive, as a part of the word, punish. That's the essence of it. People don't get, for the most part, multi-million-dollar verdicts off of compensatory damages, as far as individuals. Sometimes, if you're dealing with companies, that's a different story. When you hear in the news somebody getting a $200 million verdict, or a $300 million verdict, or even a $70 million verdict, for the most part, that is typically punitive damage awards. Because compensatory is, in the classical sense, an out-of-pocket idea. So think of somebody being injured. The odds of them having $50 million in medical bills is pretty slim. So be aware of those as you go through. And then the categories of general versus special damages. Again, you need to be strong on the definitions here. On the special damages side, those are damages that are unique to the actual plaintiff or the injured party. Medical expenses, lost wages, things of that nature. Chapter 8 moves into defenses. Be aware that as far as contributory negligence goes, contributory negligence, it completely bars a negligent plaintiff from recovery. So you have the contributory side, which said if you contribute, you could not recover. And as a part of that, you had some modified contributory negligence states that said that you had to be a certain percentage liable. Most states have moved away from this. In fact, I think at this point there's only a handful of states that use even a modified approach. Instead, what most states look to is the comparative negligence side. It's an alternative to that all or nothing idea. Now keep in mind, there are modified comparative negligence laws as well that say that a party has to be less than a certain percentage, or if you want to look at it from the flip side, the defendant has to be X percentage liable, 50+% or something along those lines. So you can have that modification in the comparative or in the contributory negligence front. As you're going through 8 in particular, look at the assumed risk items. Those are going to be factors that come into play. Last clear chance doctrine. A good way to look at all of these tort sections as you move through them is figure out what the rule is, and then ask yourself, what are the exceptions to those rules, or what are the modifications to those rules? I was communicating with one student about this, and I think it's a good rule to throw out there for you. You should be very wary of any absolutes in the law, but in particular in tort law. If you see something that is an absolute, it is probably not correct, for instance, in a quiz or test scenario. There's usually some sort of alternative or exception especially under tort law, but it stands true in most areas of the law. Chapter 9 goes into professional negligence, or professional malpractice to be more specific. I've talked about this a little bit, but keep in mind, whenever you're dealing with professional malpractice, depending on the industry and depending on the level of the profession or the level of the skill, you will have a different level of care. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If I am providing some sort of emergency assistance as a lawyer on the side of a road, and I try to pack a wound or stop bleeding and somebody gets infected, I'm going to have less of a standard of care than would an emergency room surgeon who's performing some sort of similar procedure on the side of a road. That would seem to make sense because they would be more well-trained and experienced in what to do. So give some thought to that. As a part of Chapter 9, though, as well, look at, there's a chunk about what paralegals and legal assistants should do, the role as far as malpractice goes, confidentiality, maintaining client relations, maintenance of documents. There's a specific reference in there that failure to maintain records and failure to maintain them properly is professional malpractice. And that is a big chunk of what falls on a lot of paralegals and legal assistants in a law firm. So read through those qualifications and those the points that the book makes about what a legal assistant and paralegal will need to focus on. Finally, when you look to Chapter 10, it begins to get into what I refer to as the softer torts, misrepresentation. You can look at the distinction between the intentional or the negligent side of things, but misrepresentation is just that, knowingly or intentionally misrepresenting a fact that ends up harming the party. I think the bigger focus in Chapter 10 might be the distinction between nuisances and trespass. Trespass requires that physical intrusion, whereas a nuisance just requires an interference. So, could you say that a trespass is also a nuisance? You can say that, because it's also an interference with property, but don't mix them. Trespass is a physical interference. It involves a physical invasion, whereas the nuisance itself just has to interfere. The example I typically give is this. If you are living in a neighborhood and your neighbor moves in and they decide that they're going to house their dozen or so pet pigs in the backyard, and those pigs generate a lot of odor that end up infringing on your property, interfering with your ability to sit in your backyard and enjoy your property, that would be, in that case, a private nuisance. Bright lights, consistent loud music, things like that can actually end up being a private nuisance. There's actually been litigation in the news over the years about smokers sitting on their property and the smoke wafting over into their neighbor's yard. Does that constitute a nuisance? That probably wouldn't be enough. But again, it's a case-by-case decision, and it's going to be based on the specific facts of the scenario. Okay, last bit. The midterm is going to be you writing a complaint. I'm going to put up the fact pattern for the complaint on Blackboard, and I'm going to put up a sample of a complaint. And then I'm also going to post a little snippet of a video later this week that talks about what I'll be looking for as a part of that complaint. So if you've never done one, or it's not clear from the book or the example I post, you'll get to hear me talk about it live on tape. And if you have any questions, then you can follow up with me by email or by phone. All right, thank you, and have a good week.